Welcome to Insights. I'm Dick Goldberg, and our subject today, men who batter. Why do they do it? Is there a prototype? How did they get this way? Why do women stay? Can these men be fixed? My guest today is Darald Hanusa, who knows an awful lot about the subject. Darald has been treating in private practice men who batter and also working with the victims for 30 years. Darald, for 25 years, been teaching a course at the University of Wisconsin in domestic violence, and he travels nationally and internationally to teach others how to use his techniques. He also teaches for the armed forces. Darald, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me here.
You bet. How widespread is domestic violence in America?
Well, it's very widespread. It is probably so much underestimated that it's hard to know exactly. What we know on average is that there are about 4 million women who are subjected to domestic violence per year. But a more startling figure is that once per week, every week in America, 100 women are murdered by their boyfriends or by their husbands. And so when I think about this and when I teach about it, I ask people how they would define an epidemic. And epidemic is certainly something that's widespread. It affects everyone. It's not something that you want. It's something you want to get rid of. And there's no known cure exactly. However, if 100 men were being murdered by their female partners every week in America today, you can be sure that we would have found a way to intervene by now. Okay. And so the fact that every week 100 women are murdered by their boyfriends or husbands, and we really don't have an effective way to deal with it, I think that speaks volumes for our perspective on this issue.
To be politically correct, I have to ask you, in reverse, how many women kill their boyfriends or husbands?
Very few. The numbers are very few. Now, I'll have to say, honestly, I've testified in many, many cases where women have murdered their husbands or boyfriends. It usually comes after years and years and years of having them tolerated a level of brutality that is almost unimaginable. And finally they get to a point where they're under attack and they grab a knife or use a gun. So it does happen, but the percentages aren't nearly as close as the number of women that are killed.
This raises, needless to say, so many questions, but maybe we should begin with the personality of the male who is the abuser. What's going on?
Yeah.
Why so many men fall into this pattern?
Well, you know, that's an interesting question. There really is no personality profile, but we do have a profile based on other factors. So we know that men who batter as a group have more need to have power and control. Not all men who grow up in violent families end up being abusers themselves, but we know from our research and the data we've collected over a long period of time that about 80% of the men who end up being violent in their own relationships were in fact either witnessed violence in their families or experienced it directly.
Now there's need to have control. Why?
Well, it's part of the socialization. It's part of the male masculinity traps that men are taught men are superior, they're entitled, they're privileged. In a relationship, men are supposed to have the final say. And if you grew up in a family, as I said, 80% of the men who actually do use violence in their own relationships, if you grew up in a family system where dad got his way, and if he couldn't get his way by any other means than using force, then that's what you use. The ironic part of this is that I've worked with so many men who had to physically get in between mom and dad to protect mom as dad was trying to beat her, hating what their father did, vowing they would never be like them, in my office with tears streaming down their eyes, down their face rather, because they in fact have reenacted the same scenario of violence with their own partners and shaking their head and wondering why.
Yeah, I wonder if you can take this to a level that people, men who are not batterers, can relate to. I mean, do you think almost all men hate being called out by their partner, if heterosexual men feel diminished more so than a woman who is corrected by her husband?
Well, that's a good question. I think men probably have a bigger issue being called out because of the socialization process. It's interesting. Neil Jacobson did some interesting research on violent relationships, and what he found was that one of the best predictors of a successful relationship was when men could be called out by their female partners and tolerate that. With men who batter, they can't tolerate that. They see it as an affront. And the other thing that I want to piece together with this is that many, many men who we work with had their own level of victimization in their own families. And it forms this core of childhood wounding that leads to shame. So if you have a toxic shame base, if you're shame-based, when your partner says something to you that feels like a criticism, that makes it feel like in some way, shape, or form you're inadequate, even if she doesn't mean it, especially if she does, that's going to trigger a reaction. So what I say to these men is, at times when you're responding to a criticism, like you're killing an ant with a bazooka, you know that you have a shame issue there, that it's an overreaction to something that you and I could probably respond to by saying, well, ouch, that hurt, I don't like it. These guys are responding with over-the-top, yelling, screaming, throwing things, breaking things, intimidation to back her away so they can protect that inadequacy.
Yeah, so that's what I'm going to say. They're pretty insecure people. It's not just that they're attuned to violence as they grew up, but it sounds like their ego strength is the size of an ant.
Well, I would say that. I would say they're insecure. I would say they're damaged. I would say that when it comes to shame issues, the 4 behavioral manifestations of shame that we use to protect our shame are rage, grandiosity, perfectionism, and its first cousin, procrastination, and withdrawal. So with the men that we work with, they use all of those in various methods. Certainly rage, carried to its furthest extension, is to be violent.
Okay, let's back this up. Let's think how this works. So your wife points out to you, you're really sloppy the way you keep your tool room.
Right.
Don't you ever want to straighten it up?
Right.
What goes on then that creates the rage? What does rage do for the person who hears that, rather than say, all right, or, yeah, you got a point.
Yeah.
You go, so you be, the B word, whatever.
Right.
What does that do for you?
Look at your room. Yours isn't any better than mine. How dare you criticize me? What are you doing in my workshop anyway? And that's all the facade to back her away so she doesn't criticize and so he doesn't have to feel inadequate. Yeah. Now, a lot of the men we work with come from families where they were abused, neglected in lots of different ways, shapes, or forms. Perhaps this particular man was really criticized by his own father for maybe something very similar, but it reenacts that piece of inadequacy. And then, coupled with that, most of the men, you ask for a profile, most of the men we work with do not have good social skills. They do not have conflict resolution skills, because how in the world would you learn those if you grew up in a home where it was never demonstrated, here's a constructive way of dealing with conflict, and you live in a culture that says, when it comes to power and control, some is good, more is better, and too much is just right. So not to have power is really a problem. So the power principle comes into play. The power principle goes like this. People who have very little power, or at the point where they perceive they have very little power, in a culture that says it's important to have power, will overuse what little power they have. So because they don't have very good social skills, they can't argue effectively with their partners. Most of them can't. They overuse the power they have, which is to do what? It's to go to that rage. It's to be violent and abusive for whatever reason, but the bottom line is they want to win. And they define winning as, I win, you lose. And you can do that if you want to, but defining winning in a zero-sum way means that it's going to come at the price of closeness.
Well, and this isn't defense of the abuser, but my hunch would be that these men just don't know they don't have the verbal skills their wives do, and they could feel sort of, not beat up, that's a strong word, but diminished by their wife being more articulate in expressing an issue, a problem, a feeling, and without the same tool.
I don't think they think of it that way. I don't think some of them probably do, that they feel in a one-down position in terms of being able to carry on an equal argument with their partners. They just jump right over that.
Yeah.
It's how dare you. It's the injustice that they experience by the very fact that their partner would dare to criticize them and their maleness and their masculinity.
Let me talk to my prejudice here. I'm picturing a guy with blue jeans, beer in his hand, and likes country western music, and is maybe not gotten out of high school, didn't get his high school degree.
standing right next to the guy who's wearing blue jeans and a cowboy hat, who graduated from Harvard, who is the bank president, who happens to be in the same bar with this guy, who both happen to be abusive to their partners.
Wow. So is there no pattern with income and education? It's just random?
What we know is this. There's no income, education, geographic location, upbringing that's going to insulate you or protect you from being an abusive man. I mean, it's really important to think about it. So let's pretend you are the president of some multinational corporation. And do you have social skills? Well, of course you have social skills, because you're in your penthouse office all day. You're making contracts. You're negotiating bargains with unions and employees. All day long you're using your social skills. It's 4 o'clock. You decide you're going to cut out. Maybe it's 2 o'clock. You're going to cut out and go to the golf course. So you jump in your Porsche, drive out to the golf course. You're having a great time. You look at your watch. Oh, my God, it's 4:30. I have to be home by 5 because we have company coming. You're driving your car. You just make it in 5 minutes before 5. And your partner says to you, Dick, where's the milk? You were supposed to get milk. I've got to make that souffle yet. Get back in your car. You forgot the milk. What an idiot. How can you run a company when you can't even find the milk?
Yeah.
And so for a second you buy into it. You go, oh, man, what a screw-up I am. Yeah, I got to go get the milk. And then you say, wait a minute. And you have this flashback of your dad punching your mom out when she disrespected him the way you feel you're being disrespected. And you turn on your heels and you say, wait a minute. Screw you. If you want the milk, go get it yourself. And you grab her or shove her. So it's a selective use of skills by a person who maybe has a very high profile, who has skills in some settings but decides not to use them for all kinds of reasons. Because no one would dare confront you in your job as the CEO of a multinational.
But you got a short fuse when you are called out, is what it is. Well, you won't be called out if you're the CEO.
I don't think about it in terms of a short fuse. I think about it as you make a decision. These men make choices to be abusive. It's not about a short fuse.
Do they do it because it works?
Of course. They do it because it works, and they continue it because it works until somebody stops them. So how do these guys get into treatment? Well, we know that about 40% of the men we work with are court referred. They come through probation and parole. The DA's office.
They got caught.
They got
someone
caught.
called on
There was an arrest.
So that's domestic violence case.
But the vast majority of them come to us because their partner mandated. Their partners say, either you go get help or I'm leaving, or they've already left and they say, I'm not coming back until you get help. So most of the men we work with have an external motivation for being there. But still they get there. And it's the interesting thing in terms of outcome. I don't see any difference in how they get there in terms of the end result.
You know, that's very surprising, because there's an adage in therapy that if someone's coming because someone sent them, they're not likely to do well. If they come because they want the help, they are
not
likely
for
to do
domestic
better.
violence. Initial motivation is one of the poorest predictors of outcome.
Wow.
I don't care what they say when they come in. I don't care how much they want to be there. When I start teaching them what they need to know to have a balanced, successful relationship, and they start feeling better about themselves and they're able to deal with some of the issues of shame and attachment and power and control, they start getting better. And when they start getting better, there's a buy-in. They say, wow, I didn't want to be here. I wish I could have come on my own, but this was working for me. This is great.
Wow. Boy, there's so many questions about this. I want to get to treatment.
Okay.
But before that, I want you to speak to the women who are in these relationships.
Yes.
What should they be doing?
They should do whatever they have to do to take care of themselves. Now, that could mean a lot of things. Many of the women are doing the right thing by saying to their partners, you need to go get help or I'm leaving. That's a risk for them because they've invested a lot in these relationships. They've put up with this for a long time. They've financially invested. They have children together. They bought a house together. And so saying to this man, either you get help or I'm leaving, that's a huge move for them to take that risk, because what if he says no?
Right.
Secondly, leaving can be an option sometimes, but it's not the only option. And we no longer say to women, you have to get out. Because what we know is that when women leave, they're at a 75% greater risk for the most lethal kind of violence. So we used to say that years ago. We didn't know we were setting women up. What we say is, let's evaluate your options. If you stay, how can you be safe? If you leave, how can you be safe? So those are the kinds of questions we're asking now.
Why wouldn't women see this coming? They date a guy, they get engaged. Does it come all of a sudden in the 7th year and they go, oh, I didn't know he had this side? Didn't they see it right on?
Well, it's like for any of us. It's like being on quicksand. When you walk on quicksand, it seems like it's firm. You take another step and you sink in a little bit more. You take another step and you're up to your knees. Take another step, you're up to your thighs. Pretty soon you're up to your waist. You go, holy cow, what happened? And then you start to struggle. And when you fight back and struggle, what happens? You sink in quicker. So these guys are wonderful guys when they first meet these women. If we are at a first date and I say to you, you know, you're a really nice woman, and I just want you to know that I'm really a son of a gun, and I'm angry, and I'm abusive, and I'm going to beat the crap out of you. How about a second date, honey? You know, you're not going to do that. But these guys don't do that. They put on the charm. They're wonderful. And then little by little, it's a bit of jealousy that comes out. Well, I don't want you talking to her because I don't like the way you think after you talk to her. Well, I don't want you spending all that time with your family because really you should spend time with me. Little by little, the piece of their hearts are carved out. Little by little. You don't see it coming. If on the first date, you know, he was abusive and put you down and called you a name or criticized you, there wouldn't be a second date. Right. But it happens in a subtle way. Now, there's a buy-in by these women. You invest in this guy. You love him. There's an emotional connection. You get married. You buy a house. You have children. You have a mortgage. You have car payments. How do you deal with that when he's hurting you? And no one expects that the people who are supposed to love you are going to hurt you. But for these men, there's a dangerous connection between love and abuse, because they grow up seeing that the people who are supposed to love them are also hurting them. So for them, that's normal. Yeah. That's what normal is. But they're smart enough not to do it at first, and that's what hooks these women in.
Well, the mechanics here. Do you think women who are physically abused were abused before they even got engaged?
No, typically not physically abused. You mean in their own childhoods, for instance?
No, with the man that
No, but what we do know, and it's an amazing thing when I ask men that I work with, I ask about physical violence, I ask about emotional abuse. Physical violence almost never starts until after the marriage, or there's some symbol of a marriage.
Do you think, if I may interrupt, is that because the guy's kind of cagey enough to think, I better not slug her before we get married?
Well, I think on some level, most men know that it's not okay to hit women. Most of us as men hear it's not okay to hit women. But the psychological abuse almost always starts in the courtship part of the relationship. Yeah, I put her down. I called her a name. I was sarcastic. And a lot of people don't consider that abusive behavior. But on the receiving end, it destroys your sense of your own self-worth.
Yeah, I see. So little by little, he's chipping away at her self-worth by his verbal undermining or abuse.
Verbal and emotional.
And so she's losing confidence. She's starting to think, maybe it's me.
Maybe it's me. He's not doing this to anyone else. If only, if only, if only. Women get into the if only part of this. If only I made a better meatloaf. If only I dressed in a better way. If only I kept the kids quiet. And so they start to accept what he's telling her as truth. Because what these men systematically do is they isolate their partners, their victims. So he has that pipeline to her. I don't want you to see your friends. I don't want you to see your family. It's you and me, honey, because I love you so much. And he's telling her, when he's not saying that, you're fat, you're stupid, you're ugly. You're darn lucky I'm with you because no one else would have you.
Wow.
And so she's got very little ability to challenge that. And over time, it takes its toll.
So he keeps reducing her self-esteem and at the same time making himself seem more important to her. He's the lifeline because you're really a low-level creature, but with me you're okay.
Exactly.
I would assume, tell me if I'm wrong, that these women have self-esteem problems before it begins to stay for that abuse.
Typically not. There is no profile. There is no profile of a battered woman before she's abused with any level of consistency. You look at the work by Lenore Walker and many other women. There's nothing you can necessarily point to that says that woman's going to be a battered woman.
That's kind of disorienting.
I work with physicians. I work with women who are physicians. I work with attorneys. I work with corporate execs. I work with the whole gamut of women who are in abusive relationships. And there's not one of them you could look at and say, oh yeah, I'll bet she's going to be a battered woman.
Just this quicksand phenomenon.
I just worked with a woman the other day who was a corporate executive for a major banking firm in the state of Wisconsin who said to me, I never thought I would be in this position. It never even occurred to me. This is a woman who worked her way up through the ranks. She was like the second in command of this bank. And here she is sitting in my office saying that she's being abused by her partner. You never would have guessed it. a dynamo, a powerhouse, but that threatened him.
Okay, let's get back to the 1, 2, 3s of the woman who's in this relationship. Step 1, step 2, step 3. First, I assume you say to your husband, quit it, right?
Well, first I say to her, you're not responsible for his violence. You don't make him be abusive, and you can't stop it.
Oh.
So the first thing I say to
you
women
can't
is,
stop it.
you cannot stop it because you're not making him be abusive. That's a choice she's making. That's the first thing I say.
So she can't stop. Wait a minute. Can't she stop it by saying, if you hit me once more time, I'm out the door. That's
Right.
it. That
Right.
doesn't stop him?
Absolutely not. Now he won't hit her, but he'll grab her and leave bruises on her. Or he'll push her. I didn't hit you. You said I can't hit you. So one of the features of abusers is they're really cool, really crafty with their denial system. So that's why you can't just say, did you hit her? Well, what do you mean hit her? Well, did you punch her? No, I never punched her. What did you do? I backhanded her, and when I backhanded her, I hit her so hard when she tried to defend herself, I punched a hole through her cheek with her wedding ring, but I never hit her.
Wow.
So they are crafty in terms of figuring out how to say things that in a way that they don't have to be held accountable for their behavior.
One thing that led me to want to interview you was I again and again read about men who go stalk someone who left them,
Right.
and then wind up shooting them, even though there's a restraining order, and then shooting themselves.
Right.
Who the hell is that guy?
It could be any one of those guys. It could be any one of those guys. What it is more than any of those guys are the men who feel totally isolated. And one of the lethality factors that we look at, several. One is this belief in ownership and loyalty and subservience. The men who are apt to do that, these are the risky guys. They're more apt to believe that he's entitled to her time, her attention, and they have this belief, if I can't have her, nobody can. They're apt to be men who are feeling some social isolation, so that when she says, I'm going to leave you, or she does leave, that's when the risk really does ramp up quite significantly.
So they're the more isolated.
Right.
I'll share with you, I know I'm interviewing you, but there's a book a long time ago, Seasons of a Man's Life, by a guy named Levinson, who studied men over a long period of time, and he found that 4 out of 5 men report their only close friend is their wife.
Exactly. Yeah, and I screen for that. When I do my assessments, I say to them, I want to find out something about your social network. Who are you closest to? Tell me friends or family. If they can come up with 3 people, that's amazing. And 2 of those 3 are usually family members, so they don't really count. But most men are very, very isolated. Well, that's a setup. Because when she says, I'm out of here, and he's put all of his eggs in that relationship basket, the basket he himself has created on purpose by isolating her, then his world is falling apart. The hope for a positive outcome to their future starts to crumble around the edges. What do? Oddly, one of the paradoxes of an abuser is they ramp up the violence to keep her there, which does just the opposite. It pushes her away.
So now these guys have wound up in your office.
Right.
Either by court order, as you say, or by spouse referral.
Partner
Either
mandated.
get fixed or I'm out of here.
Right.
Partner mandated. And tell us what happens next. How do you, first of all, what percentage of guys do you quote-unquote fix that don't repeat their abuse?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And when you say fix, I'd want to know what you mean by fix. And when you say repeat the abuse, I'd want to know what you mean by abuse.
Boy, oh boy, you're the expert, kiddo. What do you think I mean?
I think we ask the wrong questions all the time. That's not a question I'm interested in answering.
Oh.
Here's what I want to know.
Yeah.
I want to know, by talking with the women partners, I want to know, by virtue of your partner having been in treatment, has the quality of your life improved? Yes or no? By virtue of your partner having been in treatment, is he able to take responsibility for his violence against you? Yes or no? I want to know, by virtue of your partner having been through treatment, is he able to demonstrate true and genuine empathy for the pain he's put you through? And most importantly, I want to know, by virtue of your partner having been through treatment, are you any less afraid of him today than the day he went through treatment? And that fear factor for me is the most important question, because that's what keeps these women on edge.
Yeah.
And that's true of men who maintain their relationships after the program, but it's equally true of men who go through a separation and divorce either prior to coming to treatment or during treatment, especially if there's children. Because if you think for a minute that leaving for her keeps her safe, it does not. And sometimes it even ramps up the violence. So when I hear these women, I want to know, I want to know from her perspective these questions. Now, it stands to reason she can only say yes to these things in a positive way if, in fact, the violence has stopped.
Right.
What we know from the years of research that we've been doing in the ADAM program, the Alternatives in Treatment for Abusive Men program, is the repeat of physical violence is less than 1%.
Oh,
4
great.
years later, we're with these
Wow.
families for 4 years. We start with an assessment, we finish a year of treatment, and then we track by contacting the women every 6 months for 3 years. So we're with these families for 4 years. Whether or not they stay together is not important, especially if they're kids, because we know he's going to have contact with her. What we find is physical violence almost never comes back into it. Psychological abuse? That's a different question. What we see from these women, what they tell us is, well, he's much better than he ever was before. But he can still be a jerk. The difference is now I can tell him, you're being a jerk, and I'm not afraid that he's going to hurt me.
Right.
Whereas before, I never could have said that. And he apologizes, and he tries to make amends. He never would have done that before.
So I'm hearing a 99% success rate.
Well, it depends upon how you define success.
Oh, allow me to define it as he doesn't hit her anymore.
That I would not define that as a success. That's probably one of the least best indicators. Okay? The best indicator is whether or not she feels safe and not afraid.
And your success rate there, you're saying, is
It's over 80%. Over 80% of the women that we talk to 4 years after he started treatment tell us that she's no longer afraid of him, whereas about 93% say they're either moderately or very much of their partners pre-treatment. I don't know if that's good enough. I don't have to be the one to decide that. Our culture, our society has to say what they're willing to tolerate. Because our society, according to Linda Gordon, has always tolerated a level of abuse toward women and oppressing women. And it's interesting that depending upon which political party is in office at the time, there's been more violence tolerated against women or less violence tolerated against women.
That's very interesting. In the time we have left, could you give us a little overview of what treatment involves?
Yes. Treatment is a very extensive, complex process. It's multimodal. Men come in, they go through a very detailed assessment, which involves their partners as well, because we go through what's called a timeout interview with her there, so we can teach this man how to use a timeout. So when he tries to leave, she doesn't get really worried about that. So we go through that with them together. We collect a lot of information. We get to know these guys very, very well, and that's one of the reasons that our dropout rate is so low. Out of every 10 men who start the program, 8.5 per, it's the way the statistics work out, 8.5 men complete treatment. Nationally, there's a 52% dropout rate for programs like this. We get to know them. I know the name of their mom, dad, brothers, sisters, their first pet. I get to know these guys in a way that I have a relationship with them. After the assessment is over, they go through an orientation group. It's kind of a denial focus group that's really aimed at breaking through some of their denial. They have to go through an exercise in the group called Naming the Violence. The first time they've ever spoken to anybody else outside their family about what they've done to their partner, and they have to be really specific. So if they say, I call her every name in the book, somebody in the group, and not me, one of the other group members is going to say, well, what book are you quoting from? And exactly what do you call her? Well, I can be sarcastic. Well, give us an example. So they really have to be specific.
And own their behavior.
Exactly. After the orientation group, which is really intense, by the way, one of the things the men say after the first couple of sessions is that it's wonderful to be here. I can't believe this, but it's nice to know I'm not alone. After the orientation group, they go through a very detailed skills group, cognitive behavioral group with a pro-feminist analysis. We're giving them the tools. We're putting the tools in their toolbox.
You teach them some social skills and how to deal with conflict.
Here's what to do, and here's how to do it, and here's how this relates to power and control. Here's how you achieve equality.
You forgot your favorite phrase. You used to say, say it, don't play it.
Say it, don't play it. So if you can say it, if you can express your feelings, then you don't play it out with your behaviors. Exactly. Thank you for that. The last piece, and the piece that I really like the best, is the process self-help group. It asks the why question. Why am I so abusive? Why do I hurt the people I love? So we're really trying to get at this piece of moral development. We're trying to teach them how to have empathy for their partner's pain. Part of the way we get into that is we teach them about their own pain, the way they were victimized, and then they can see more directly, oh, I know how that feels. One of the things we do One of the things we do is we have them talk about how they were hurt, how that impacted them, how it forms some of their own issues of shame, and how they respond to those shame triggers, we call them, in their own relationships.
And how long does this process take?
It takes about 14 months from start to finish to get through the program. The group part of it is about 12 months.
Why don't we close with this? You have a poem you want to read.
Yes.
I know you want to get it in. So why don't we close with that poem?
Wonderful. So this is what the men do as a summary of their own childhood experiences. This one's called Reflections of Dad. The car door slams, chills run through my body. He's home, he's been drinking. I must take care of my family. Be still, be quiet, and listen. The yelling, the screaming, the crying. The beating begins, and the night never ends. The hatred and fear fill my bones as I call my brother on our walkie-talkie phones. Are you okay, I ask. He whispers, I'm fine. And I know in my heart I must help my mom. As I open the door, I see tears rolling down her face. He just keeps hitting her. Isn't there any safe place? I run down the stairs and jump on his back. I start hitting him and yelling, please, Dad, please stop. This is the man I never wanted to be as I look back to my father and all the hateful memories. But it's not over yet as I look in the mirror and all I can see is reflections of Dad staring at me. It scares me why I couldn't see how this is the man I've turned out to be. Each day is a struggle to turn my life around, and soon my home will be that safe ground. With hope and time, peace and love, the next time I look, it will be my own reflections I see.
Darald Hanusa, thank you very, very much for being with us, and I hope you'll join us on the next edition of Insights.